When most people think of the Waffen-SS, you get this image, right? This sort of ironclad, fanatical, racially pure elite.
Exactly. It's become this symbol, really, of Nazi dedication and brutality, too. Decades of that image.
But the thing is, the actual history, what the sources tell us,
Yeah.
it's a lot messier.
Oh, absolutely. Far more complex. What we're looking at here, based on this military history analysis, is an organization that was constantly changing, really morphing under the incredible pressure of total war.
It wasn't static at all.
Not a bit. It was forced again and again to basically abandon its own core ideas, its most sacred principles, really, just to get enough men in the field.
Right. So that's what we're doing today. We're tracing this story, this evolution, from the very beginning in 33 right up to the collapse in 45. And our goal for you listening is to kind of synthesize how this group went from being Hitler's tiny, hand-picked, racially perfect political guard.
The absolute ideal in their view.
Yeah, exactly. To this huge, sprawling, 500,000-man army that ended up taking in, everyone. Forced conscripts, foreign volunteers, even actual criminals.
And it's not just about listing the changes, is it? We need to understand what that meant. What did that transformation do to its fighting reputation, its structure, and maybe most importantly, the dark legacy it left behind?
Definitely. The contradictions are really stark. So to really get a handle on this massive change, we need to start right back at the beginning. And crucially, it wasn't called the Waffen-SS then.
No, not at all. It started as simply the armed wing, the trained part of the bigger Nazi Party organization, the SS, the Schutzstaffel.
So just protection squads initially.
Pretty much. And this armed bit was called the SS-Verfügungstruppen, the VT.
VT. And that name is important, right?
It's critical. Verfügungstruppen basically means disposition troops, troops at disposal. It explicitly told everyone these soldiers served purely at the Führer's pleasure.
Okay. So completely political from the outset. Not part of the regular German army, the Heer.
Absolutely distinct. And that political nature, it caused a lot of friction right away with the traditional army.
I can imagine. The Heer must have resented this parallel armed force.
Deeply. They saw themselves as the only legitimate military force in Germany. But Hitler? He'd already decided the VT was essential for his political goals. They weren't going away.
And these VT units, they weren't just sitting around?
No, not at all. By 1939, they'd already set up 4 regiments, Standarten they called them, and they were immediately involved in military stuff, working alongside the Heer.
Where specifically?
We see them in the occupation of Austria and Czechoslovakia. They were showing they could actually fight, not just march in parades.
So building combat experience early on.
Exactly. And this all led up to their role in the Polish campaign. That really cemented their combat function and set the stage for, everything that came next. Big expansion.
But there's another element we need to bring in here from the start. Something darker.
Yes. The Totenkopf, the Death's Head units.
Their main job was guarding concentration camps.
That was their primary role, yes. But, and this is crucial, the sources show that elements from these Kammerguard units were also moved into the field, integrated as combat units, right from this early period.
Wow. So the lines were blurred from day one.
Intentionally blurred. You had Hitler's bodyguards, the political VT troops, and the camp guards all mixing into this new military force. Terror and combat fused together.
That's quite a foundation.
It is. And their performance in Poland, however brutal, gave the SS leadership the justification they needed. They saw the potential for a much bigger force.
So after Poland, they expanded rapidly.
Very quickly, those regiments became brigades, then divisions.
And that's when the name changed.
Right. This growing military branch needed a proper military name. Okay. It was briefly called the Bewaffnet SS, the Armed SS, but then they settled on the name we all know, the Waffen-SS.
The formal birth of this parallel army.
Exactly. Designed specifically for the future political needs of the Reich, as Himmler saw it. So, with that new name, Waffen-SS, they moved fast to kind of formalize the structure of what they intended to be their elite corps. And to really understand the whole organization, you need to know these first 3 divisions. They were the bedrock.
The foundation stones, what were they?
Okay, first, the absolute heart. The Leibstandard SS, Adolf Hitler. The LSSAH, basically Hitler's personal armed guard. Growing up, loyalty there was unquestionable. Personal.
Got it. The Führer's own.
Then you had the Das Reich Division. This was formed from some of those original VT regiments, the Deutschland and der Führerstandaren. It sort of represented the older political combat arm.
Okay, more of the original political fighters.
And third, completing this sort of ideological triangle was the Totenkopf Division.
The one formed from the concentration camp guards we just mentioned.
Exactly. And the key thing here is these three divisions embodying personal loyalty, political fighting spirit, and the apparatus of terror, they got everything first. Best men, best gear, best training, absolute priority.
And the ideology underpinning this core, you said it was rigid.
Extremely. It was built on two pillars. Relentless, strict racial selection, and heavy, constant political indoctrination.
So it wasn't about finding the best natural soldiers necessarily.
Not primarily, no. It was about creating the most loyal, most ideologically pure officer material for the future.
So it was a long-term political project, too.
Very much so. The sources are quite clear on this. Himmler saw the Waffen-SS as like a breeding ground for the future leaders of the entire SS empire. These men were supposed to be groomed in combat, vetted for racial and political purity, then step into key roles across the SS after the war. Every officer was a political officer first and foremost.
But ideals rarely survive contact with reality, especially war.
Especially total war. Exactly. The sheer demand for manpower started chipping away at that purity almost immediately, even before the really catastrophic losses started piling up later on.
So the cracks appeared early.
They did. The first big compromise came as early as 1940. After the initial successes in the West, they realized Germany alone couldn't sustain the planned growth. So they started recruiting outside Germany's borders.
Where did they look first?
They focused on what they called Nordic peoples, Scandinavians, Dutch, Belgians, people they considered racially acceptable within their twisted worldview.
Still trying to keep it within the Germanic family, so to speak.
Right. They set up new units, new Standard 10 like Nordland and Westland, specifically for these foreign volunteers.
Okay.
Then they merged these with an existing German unit, Germania, to create the Wiking Division.
The Wiking Division. So that was the first major mixed nationality unit.
It was, and it was a conscious bending of the rules. They kept up the appearance of racial superiority, but it was the first admission that Germany alone couldn't fill the ranks.
Did it work? Did these foreign volunteers fight well?
Apparently so. Wiking became the sort of template. It proved, in their eyes, that if foreign volunteers were racially okay and ideologically motivated, they could be effective. But that narrow definition of acceptable was about to get blown wide open.
Okay, so this is where the story really takes a sharp turn. If Wiking was, like you said, bending the rules, what happened after 1943 was just breaking them entirely.
Completely. It's a total collapse of the original framework.
Really?
The war turning against Germany, especially after Stalingrad, the massive losses in the East, it created this unavoidable manpower crisis for the SS, catastrophic shortages.
They just couldn't replace the losses with pure Germans anymore.
Not even close. So they had to ditch those precious racial principles they'd built everything on. They were just desperately scrambling for bodies anywhere they could find them in the occupied territories.
Where did they start looking first when things got desperate?
They tried to keep it sort of ideologically manageable at first. They targeted the Volksdeutsch.
Ethnic Germans living outside Germany, right? Like in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. In places like Romania, Hungary, they could still spin that politically, claiming these were lost Germans being brought back into the fold. It was slightly more palatable to the hardliners.
But that wasn't enough either.
Nowhere near enough. The demand was just too huge. So the SS came up with this increasingly convoluted, almost frantic plan to recruit foreigners of basically all nationalities.
All nationalities, even those they considered inferior.
Yes, but they tried to maintain the facade, the illusion of Nordic or Germanic superiority, mostly to keep the Nazi leadership happy back home.
How did they try to do that initially?
The first idea was pretty impractical. They planned to take these recruits, Frenchmen, Latvians, Ukrainians, whoever, and just sprinkle them thinly throughout the existing, reliable German units.
The dilution approach. Hope the German court keeps them in line.
Sort of, yeah. Keep the command structure German, ensure political reliability that way.
Did that work?
Failed almost instantly. The number of men they needed was just too vast, and the losses kept mounting. Thin spreading wasn't going to cut it. They had no choice. They had to start forming entire divisions out of foreigners.
Wow. Entire divisions made up of non-Germans.
Mostly, yes. Supplemented by just a, quote, sprinkling of German Waffen-SS cadres for command and political direction. And it got so diluted that eventually they even had to start taking foreigners into the officer corps.
Which completely contradicts the original goal of creating this pure German leadership cadre.
Directly contradicts it. It shows the sheer desperation.
The source mentioned something really interesting here, how they use the naming system to manage the awkwardness of this.
Yeah, this is a fascinating detail. It's like a code for the unit's racial makeup. It helped them manage the internal politics and the ideology.
So how did it work?
Okay, if a unit had a decent percentage of actual Germans, or those early acceptable Germanic volunteers, Scandinavians, Dutch, Flemish, Walloons, even some French, by then it got the designation Freiwilligen in its name.
Freiwilligen meaning volunteer.
Right. It signaled, ideological acceptability. Even if many were pressured or essentially conscripted, the name kept up appearances.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The 11th SS Freiwilligen Panzergrenadier Division, Nordland. That Freiwilligen tag tells you it's notionally composed of volunteers from acceptable groups.
Okay. And what about the units with lots of, say, Slavs or Balts? The Nazis considered racially inferior.
Well, those units had to carry the designation Waffen as part of their name.
Waffen, just meaning armed or weapon.
Exactly, like the 15th Waffen Grenadier Division SS, which was largely Latvian. The Waffen prefix was a subtle but clear signal to those in the know. This unit is militarily necessary, but racially second-rate.
So a public way of marking racial hierarchy within their own army.
Precisely. Operationalized racial theory right there in the unit names.
This whole shift just fundamentally changed what the Waffen-SS was. It wasn't that elite racial vanguard anymore.
Not even close. But here's the kicker. Despite this dilution, despite being filled with conscripts often fighting for a regime that despised them, these divisions were still expected to fight with that same old fanaticism.
How did they ensure that? A Latvian conscript isn't going to feel the same loyalty as someone from the original Leibstandarte.
The motivation was brutal and effective. Propaganda mixed with real fear and often complicity.
Complicity?
Yeah. The SS leadership made sure these foreign soldiers knew their fate, if captured, especially by the Soviets, would be horrific. Worse than regular German soldiers. They were often deliberately involved in atrocities or attached to units known for war crimes.
Burning their bridges, basically.
Exactly, making surrender seem impossible, or at least a death sentence. They were pushed into a corner where fighting to the last seemed like the only option, purely out of self-preservation.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at the sheer size this thing became. Despite all the internal contradictions and compromises, the Waffen-SS grew into this huge military machine.
Yeah. Enormous. By the end, they created something like 42 divisions, plus 3 brigades, and loads of smaller units, too.
42 divisions, that's a lot. What kinds?
A real mix, reflecting the scramble for manpower. There were 7 panzer divisions, the armored spearhead, 12 panzergrenadier divisions, mechanized infantry, 6 mountain divisions, 11 standard grenadier or infantry divisions, 4 cavalry divisions, believe it or not, and even 1 police division.
A whole spectrum. But you mentioned a caveat earlier.
Yes. The divisions in name only. It's really important. A lot of those divisions, especially the ones formed late in the war, like 1944, 1945.
They weren't really division strength.
Not even close, often just regimental strength, sometimes barely a battalion. Calling them divisions was more about propaganda or maybe boosting morale than reflecting actual combat power. It really shows the desperation by that point.
So within this huge, sometimes hollow structure, where was the real muscle?
Still, the SS Panzer divisions, the source is clear on this. These tended to remain the most purely German units. They consistently got the best equipment, and they were seen as the most politically reliable. They were the strategic fire brigade.
The elite with the diluted elite.
You could say that. And you can see this focus by tracking the path of the Leibstandarte, the LSSAH itself.
Hitler's original bodyguard unit. How did it evolve?
It started tiny, right? Just bodyguards. Then it became a full motorized infantry regiment by 39, expanded to a brigade in 40. Then, after performing really well as shock troops in the Greek campaign, it got upgraded to a full division.
And it kept getting rebuilt and prioritized.
Always. Took heavy losses in Russia, got pulled back to France in 42 to rebuild as a core part of the new SS Panzer Corps. Then, after some brutal anti-partisan stuff in Italy in 43, it was reformed again as the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler.
The fact it kept getting top-tier status and gear, despite losses, really shows its political importance.
Absolutely. It reflects Hitler's favoritism and the SS's internal clout. But there was another key reason these SS Panzer formations were so effective, something structural.
Okay.
It came down to tank strength. And this was purely political maneuvering by Himmler and SS General Paul Hauser.
So they lobbied for more tanks.
Essentially, yes. See, a typical Army Panzer Division, or even a Panzer Grenadier Division in the Heer, usually only had a single tank battalion organically attached.
Okay.
But the SS Panzer Corps divisions, Leibstandarte, Wiking, Das Reich, Totenkopf, they managed to get their Panzer Grenadier divisions structured to include a full tank regiment.
A whole regiment instead of a battalion. That's a huge difference in firepower.
Massive. It meant that, tank for tank, these SS divisions were basically equivalent to the Army's full-strength panzer divisions. They just had way more armor integrated into their structure than comparable Army units.
Which explains a lot about their reputation as heavy hitters.
It does. Gave them incredible striking power and flexibility. Plus, they usually got the newest tanks first, like the Tigers. They were often held in reserve for critical moments, which just reinforced that elite fire brigade image.
And this growing power eventually led to them forming their own higher-level commands, like armies.
Yeah, that was the next step. They formed two SS armies. The 6th SS Panzer Army, famous, or infamous, for the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, and the final defense of Vienna.
Right.
And the 11th SS Army, kind of hastily put together late in the war, fighting up in northern Germany in 45.
And corps-level commands, too.
13 SS Corps in total. And interestingly, 7 of those weren't even formed until 1944. 4 were Panzer Corps, again showing the priority. It really illustrates how the SS built this parallel command structure, increasingly rivaling and even absorbing parts of the Wehrmacht.
So, back to the recruitment. As the need for men just exploded, this foreign recruitment drive really did turn the Waffen-SS into that polyglot army you mentioned. The list of nationalities is just, well, it's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah. It really speaks to the sheer desperation by 43-44. The sources list units made up of Frenchmen, Latvians, Estonians, Ukrainians, even Soviet POWs who switched sides.
Wow, POWs too.
Yes. Plus Italian fascists after Mussolini fell, Dutch, Walloons from Belgium, Flemings from Belgium, Hungarians. It's a long list.
And how they got these men varied wildly, I assume. Not exactly lining up to volunteer.
Not usually, no. In Western Europe, they might lean more on local collaborators, fascist parties using anti-communist propaganda. But in the East and the Balkans, much rougher methods.
Like what?
Relying on puppet governments, like in the Baltic states, to provide levies. Or outright coercion, especially with the Volksdeutsch drive in 43.
The ethnic Germans in Romania, Hungary, Slovakia.
The German government basically made deals with those allied governments to let the SS just take their eligible ethnic German men. We're talking immense pressure, threats against families if they didn't volunteer.
And how many men did they get that way?
The source mentions over 100,000 Volksdeutsch were pulled into the SS like this. Often men who barely spoke German, didn't want to be there, just transferred from, say, the Romanian army straight into an SS uniform. No real vetting.
Just filling gaps.
Exactly. But we have to circle back here to the fate of many of these recruits, especially the Eastern Europeans. It was incredibly dangerous for them.
Why specifically?
Well, think about it. Ukrainians, Latvians, Estonians, Russians who put on an SS uniform. In the eyes of the Soviet Union, they were traitors, plain and simple.
So if captured by the Red Army.
The source is blunt. Execution was almost certain. And tragically, even if they surrendered to the Western Allies, they were often handed back to the Soviets after the war, where they faced the same fate.
That's grim.
It is. For pretty much any SS soldier taken prisoner on the Eastern Front, survival was unlikely. It created this awful feedback loop. Compromise principles for manpower, then use the terror of Soviet reprisal to make those unwilling conscripts fight fanatically.
But the decay didn't stop at just reluctant foreigners, did it? It went further. It led to units that were the absolute opposite of the original SS ideal.
Oh, yes. The source highlights 2 particularly notorious examples of this final stage of decay.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, the 13th SS Mountain Division, Handschar.
Handschar. That was the Bosnian Muslim division.
Primarily, yes. Formed mostly from Bosnian Muslims and some Croat volunteers. The source basically calls it one of the worst, most unreliable units in the whole Waffen-SS.
Why so bad?
Recruitment was often driven by local ethnic hatreds, anti-Serb feelings, not any real belief in Nazism. When they couldn't get enough Muslim volunteers, they had to pad it out with Christian Croats. Cohesion was terrible.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. They sent the division to France for training in mid-1943, and parts of it promptly mutinied, killed several German officers. Just a complete mess.
What happened when they actually saw combat?
Deployed to the Balkans for anti-partisan warfare, they became notorious for atrocities against Christian villages, and their desertion rate was sky high. Eventually, the Germans had to basically disarm the division in late 1944. Utter failure.
Okay, that's pretty bad. What's the other example?
The one that truly shows the absolute bottom, the final rejection of any elite pretense, the Durlwanger Division. Officially, the 36th SS Grenadier Division, Durlwanger, though calling it a division, especially at the end, was a joke.
Durlwanger. That name has a reputation.
Horrific one. This unit was the polar opposite of the SS myth. Its members weren't racially pure elites. They were deliberately recruited undesirables.
Like who?
Common criminals released from prison, military prisoners, including political ones like communists, hardened career criminals, Soviet and Ukrainian POWs considered expendable, German convicts pulled from penal battalions specifically for this unit.
Literally scraping the bottom of the barrel and then scraping underneath it.
And the commander, SS Colonel Oskar Dirlewanger himself, he was infamous. A known sadist, drunkard, convicted child molester, previously kicked out of the SS for his behavior.
Then Himmler brought him back and put him in charge of this unit.
Resurrected him. Because Himmler valued one thing above all in this context. Absolute ruthlessness, especially for brutal anti-partisan warfare where atrocities were expected, even encouraged.
The regular army must have loved having these guys around.
The source says the German army considered the Dirlewanger Brigade notoriously unreliable, but they were used anyway.
And their record?
As bad as you'd expect. Responsible for some of the worst massacres and atrocities against partisans, civilians, Jews, particularly infamous for their role in crushing the Warsaw Uprising.
So Dirlewanger really proves the point. By the end, it wasn't about elite soldiers. It was just about finding loyal, brutal instruments of terror. Race, quality, criminal record. None of it mattered anymore.
Only ruthlessness and a twisted form of loyalty remained.
So even with units like Handschar and Dirlewanger dragging down the average, the Waffen-SS as a whole kept growing into this massive force on the map. But how did it actually fit in with the regular German army? Here, it must have been an awkward relationship.
Perpetually uneasy is a good way to put it. On paper, in theory, when Waffen-SS units were fighting at the front, they were supposed to be under the operational command of the local army commander. Himmler's direct influence was meant to stop there.
But that wasn't the reality.
Not under the Nazis, no. The sources show Himmler constantly interfered. He essentially kept the right to approve where and when his SS troops were deployed, sometimes overruling senior army generals if it suited his political aims.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, the source mentions the spat with Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the commander in the West in 1944. Rundstedt was temporarily relieved, and part of the reason cited was conflict with Himmler over controlling Waffen-SS units. It shows that political pull.
So the army commanders couldn't always count on having full control over the SS units supposedly under them.
It created real friction and strategic headaches for the Führer. But paradoxically, as the SS units, especially those panzer divisions, gained this reputation, deserved or not, as elite shock troops, their political power just grew stronger.
How did that manifest?
You started seeing SS Corps commands controlling not just SS divisions, but also large numbers of regular army units placed under them. The SS command structure was expanding upwards.
So the tail started wagging the dog in a way.
Increasingly so. And by autumn 1944, it became official. When the 6th SS Panzer Army was formed for the Ardennes offensive, regular army units were formally assigned as part of an SS army formation for the very first time.
That's a huge shift. The SS, which started as this fringe political guard, was now commanding large parts of the regular army.
It showed how far they'd come in building a parallel power structure. And in the final year, 44-45, especially after the July bomb plot against Hitler, the SS's power surged even more.
How so?
The regime became incredibly paranoid about the army's loyalty, so they started attaching Waffen-SS personnel directly to regular army units.
As what? Like liaisons?
More like political watchdogs. Their job was to bolster reliability, prevent retreats or desertions, essentially acting like political commissars, ensuring loyalty through intimidation right at the front line.
And the SS role in those last-ditch formations.
They formed the core. In the hastily created Volksgrenadier divisions, and even the Volkssturm militia, experienced Waffen-SS NCOs and officers often provided the leadership framework. And the manpower crisis got so bad, they were just pulling people from anywhere. Large numbers of Luftwaffe ground crew, Navy personnel, just transferred wholesale into the Waffen-SS to plug the massive gaps in the ranks of battered SS divisions.
It's incredible when you look at the numbers. You said it started small.
Just over 150,000 men in late 1940.
And by June 1944, right before D-Day.
Almost 600,000. The source gives the figure 594,000 men under Waffen-SS command, a massive force.
And they fought pretty much everywhere.
Almost everywhere Germany fought on land. The only major exceptions seem to be North Africa and the initial invasion of Norway. Otherwise, Poland, France, 1940, the Balkans, Finland, Russia.
Russia was the big one, right?
Absolutely critical. They went from 5 divisions there in 42 to 13 by 44. They were also heavily involved in Italy, fighting partisans in Yugoslavia, Normandy, the final desperate battles in Hungary. A truly continental presence.
Okay, so we've traced this whole arc from that small, ideologically pure guard to this enormous, compromised, multinational army fighting everywhere. If you had to boil it down, what's the single biggest contradiction at the heart of the Waffen-SS story?
I think the core contradiction is this. It was created to be the absolute elite. Racially pure, politically fanatical, the future leadership. But the sheer reality of total war forced it to become the opposite in many ways. A polyglot force, often poorly trained, with combat effectiveness varying wildly, especially later on.
So the war itself destroyed the very ideal the organization was founded on.
Precisely. It traded its founding principles, that obsession with race and quality, for sheer numbers, for quantity and often compulsion. But, and this is the crucial but,
Go on.
while the quality, the training, the racial purity all eroded, one thing didn't diminish. In fact, it arguably became its most defining characteristic, especially in the eyes of its victims in history.
It's brutality, its involvement in war crimes.
Exactly. We have to state this clearly, based on the historical record presented in sources like this. Despite decades of attempts by former members and apologist groups, the source mentions HIA to claim they fought a clean war, just like the regular army.
That's not accurate.
It's demonstrably false. The Waffen-SS was directly implicated in and responsible for horrific, systematic atrocities and war crimes across Europe. The source specifically flags things like the Malmedy massacre by Kampfgruppe Piper during the Battle of the Bulge as just one well-documented example.
So that brutality is inseparable from the organization's history, regardless of the changing composition of its troops.
Absolutely. It completes the dark irony, doesn't it? They set out to create this superior officer corps, this racial elite. They ended up desperately fielding divisions of criminals and unwilling conscripts. They lost the elite quality, they lost the racial purity, but they kept the fanaticism and the political loyalty needed to carry out the Nazi regime's most brutal orders right to the very end.
The ultimate loyalty was to the ideology of violence itself, perhaps.
That's a stark way to put it, but yeah. The final message for you, the listener, might be in that transaction. This history shows how ideology and the brutal necessities of war can combine to just shatter founding principles. For Himmler and Hitler, it seems political loyalty and utter ruthlessness trumped everything else in the end. #tag outro.
So we've done our deep dive today into the Waffen-SS. We followed it from that tiny group serving at the Führer's pleasure back in 1933, all the way to this sprawling, nearly 600,000 strong force by 1944, racially mixed, politically driven, fighting and committing atrocities across almost every front.
Yeah, we've seen how it just outgrew its own foundations, really. It couldn't maintain those original ideals of race and elite selection. War forced it to embrace the very groups, Slavs, foreigners, even criminals, that its core ideology despised. What was meant to be the racial pinnacle became maybe the most pragmatically compromised part of the Third Reich's military machine.
And that tension really stands out, doesn't it? Between Hitler's original vision, this pure, fanatical elite guard, and the relentless grinding reality of total war. That reality forced the SS to give up almost every principle except one.
Unquestioning political loyalty. That seemed to be the only constant.
But maybe here's a final thought for you to consider. The SS began with this grand ambition, right? To forge an elite corps, racially superior, destined to rule a conquered empire.
Right.
But the war, the collapsing Reich, it twisted that ambition into something else entirely.
It became an organization that perfected the weaponization of fanaticism, a loyalty so extreme it could somehow bind together true believers, convicts, and terrified conscripts, all fighting for a doomed cause. It really shows that, in the end, political utility and ruthlessness, not race or quality, were the only principles the Waffen-SS truly managed to sustain until that bitter final curtain fell.